now we're kind of going into here's how a modern iPaaS can impact the business and help to mitigate those. So one is leveraging your existing investments, right? You're not, we're being driven to meet growth targets. We're told to minimize our operational costs, minimize our spend. This idea of leveraging your digital workforce, we've talked a little about this workforce. We'll talk a little more now about the practical actions you can take to leverage that team. And I saw the word practical, which is why I said it before, so I'll say it again. But we love this idea of practical digital transformation, how you can avoid that 70% failure rate and make this work. And then all of it, right? In times of economic uncertainty, in times of high risk, you want to be able to demonstrate the business value of the investments you've made, of the decisions you've made, and the actions you take. So that's where a modern iPaaS really can help drive these things forward. Regardless of which of those strategies we talked about earlier, retrench, try to grow, or wait and see, a modern iPaaS can simultaneously drive reductions in operational costs, including IT spend, and simultaneously support growth initiatives. So let's take a look at some of these. So first, we talked about leveraging your existing assessment. This is really getting control of that SaaS usage and spend, right? Everybody is under pressure to rein in that SaaS usage, both to protect security and privacy vulnerabilities and reduce spend, right? And there's been a lot of investment in discovery tools and management tools to identify the authorized and unauthorized shadow IT usage. They're very popular. A lot of companies are using CASBs to enable IT to better control user access, improve security and compliance. But it's all about shutting down the vulnerabilities and minimizing shadow IT. And yeah, you've got to do that. You've got to protect. Number one, job is security, and then we can start to think about how we're going to do things. Additionalizing of authorized applications for user availability data entry and the use of shadow IT are being used to support current business processes. And if you just cut off that access, what we're going to get is reduced productivity. We're not going to be able to, business teams are not going to be able to do what they need to do. And the result's going to be, reduced productivity, degraded business performance, very unhappy business users, very unhappy leaders, or they'll just find a different way to access those shadow IT solutions. So an iPaaS that enables IT to reduce that SaaS usage and sprawl without the loss of business capabilities, right? Because we're simplifying the automation of business process, we're simplifying the integration of data across applications, and we're allowing, with the use of a modern iPaaS, we're allowing, business users to, we're kind of enabling that workforce of hackers to do the things that they want to do, to try DIY, to experiment and innovate rather than resorting to shadow IT. And at the same time, it allows you to get rid of the legitimate extra licensing. No more providing someone pure visibility into an app. Just dump that data in data warehouse and present it using your data visualization tool of choice. So we're going to get better productivity, we're going to reduce license count, and we're going to get cost savings. So that's where the control and security is up, costs are down, and you're actually getting that value out of those SaaS applications. That was the point of investing in them in the first place. So
let's put
Nick,
some, I mean, we've talked about this a number of times in terms of these various groups. So let's put some numbers to this. So this is some of the Gartner research, and I would say Gartner, Forrester, any analyst you speak to sees these compounding pieces. Now, one of the things that we've talked about is actually the right mix or the synergy between these. It's not, I would say in a world where you have two extremes, where you have only focused, dedicated resources, you will never be able to reach the economies of scale to meet the SaaS sprawl that Dave and us and we've been talking about throughout this. On the other side of the pendulum, if you constantly have this kind of fully dispersed, completely distributed model where you really only have people that can work on this, an ad hoc or citizen, in this kind of sense of everyone's free whenever they can do it, take advantage of it. You lose some of the control and governance to make sure that the data is consistent. So it really is kind of finding this perfect balance, this Goldilocks pattern, if you will, of the right mix of focused and ad hoc resources, and then utilizing your focused resources to be most effectively as possible to help kind of define your data and analytics strategy, so that when you have this mix of users, you can actually empower them. Now, what I'm seeing from our customers as a great example is when they find that right mix, when they're able to kind of have both focused and ad hoc resources, is that we see many of these iPaaS programs are driven to drive a wider enterprise-wide adoption of basic integration patterns, right? How do we make sure that the same kind of consistency of data exists in our finance team, exists in our sales and marketing team? Because we want to see pipeline. Or hey, we're a PSA company and we're having a lot of our new employees route from our HRIS system into our finance system. We need to have that same kind of scrutiny. When we see those teams mix, where you have that both focused and ad hoc resources, we start to see their ability to integrate and start solving some of those manual process removals, as we've talked about, 3 to 4 times faster than organizations that are on either end of those pendulums that I was talking about, right? Dedicated resources will be able to go, an inch deep and a mile wide in all the applications, which might help. And we've kind of talked about some of those beginning projects, but then don't ever fully gather the true value out of their systems, versus citizen integrators or the ad hoc teams that can go deep within a particular set of applications because that's what they know. But then that expertise and experience never really translates to the rest of the business. Now, Jeremy, I think you've kind of dealt with similar problems at Modus. How are you utilizing some of these more business technologists in terms of ownership of the data and driving some of those initiatives?
Nick, one of the things that we look at is automation as an extension of our employees rather than replacing them. So we really want to empower everything that they're doing and allow them to do their job more successfully and accurately without having to think about it. And often that means not only automating it, but finding a way to put it, give them some visibility to it. So for example, with Integrator, we'll give them access so they can go view the flows, they can see errors, and they can funnel those up if it's something that needs to be taken care of, but they can, track their progress as they're going. And that's really helped transform a lot for us.
Yeah. I mean, you've hit on some really interesting points, which is the value of the employees isn't the manual processing that they were doing. It was the knowledge of the business process. So keeping that in, to your extension. I mean, I think that's generally what we're seeing, is that if we don't find ways, and we keep hitting on this shadow IT concept, but if we don't find ways to empower those users that have that acumen, they will they're savvy enough that they will find ways of essentially adapting and creating solutions that then fall outside of the paradigm. And then, to some of the questions, and then that is even more compounded with this great transition of workforce because of the retention. All right. The knowledge of the business process went out the door, as well as the knowledge of the technology that solved the problem. So the next person you bring in, it's exponentially more difficult for them because they have to figure out both. And actually, I think this is a good transition point. We've been focused, if we look at that triangle of people, process, and technology, we've been talking a lot about people. But Dave, you've got some interesting points on the process side, and how that works and what we're talking about from a transformation perspective.
Excellent segue. Actually, so one of the things somebody you were asking earlier, how do you avoid that? How do you avoid being one of the 70%? So I mentioned that Boston Consulting Group study. Why is that failure rate so high? And this is a quote from Didier Bonnet. He's a thought leader in digital transformation. He's written some great books, Leading Digital, Hacking Digital, and he's kind of the thought leader there. But he identified 3 reasons why these failure rates so high, and the primary reason is just lack of a strong digital transformation strategy. That people are just going in all kinds of different directions, and where this kind of segues back to what you were just saying, Nick, is if they're individuals, even if they're doing great things, that's not scalable. that they've solved one problem, no one knows about it, and as soon as they leave, their solution is gone, right? So this, but this having the bad checks out is especially bad when IT is not part of strategic planning, and another reason is, hey, initiatives has poor execution. It's like any big project, right? There's poor communication, bad governance. Whether we're prioritizing the technology over adoption, we're focusing on the one metrics. We've all been involved in great big projects that failed. I came from the ERP world where you could spend 3 years trying to implement SAP and fail, and everybody gets fired, and you're still in this. You haven't gotten anywhere. But what's interesting is this third reason, and this is what he's really focused on, because this is the reason that anybody as an IT organization can address, and it harkens back to this idea of practical digital transformation, getting away from the big budget, is that, hey, these digital transformations fails, they were going too big, going too fast, right? He further goes, there's a learning curve in digital transformation, and most companies need to walk before they can run. And here's, I just love this quote, is the key is start with modernization. The answer is build the capacity for digital transformation over time. And, getting quick wins, that will get you executive buy-in, and that will lead to more resources, and that will lead to more capability, so you can do larger resource projects, and those larger projects will drive even greater business impact. So by being iterative, it's always so hard for me to say, but it so harkens back to what you were saying before, Nick, is by giving people a platform that everybody is working together, that capability is not individuals here and there are become really good at something or are really good at something and use some level of shadow IT to solve a problem, whether for their team or even for a business unit, with a platform that builds that capability over time, not only from a from preserving the technology by providing the levels of governance so that security and privacy regulations are met, because that's the big risk if individuals are off doing their own thing, and by enabling more and more people, right? Because an easy platform that everybody can be trained on, that business users can be made capable, that is going to scale. That's capacity that the organization maintains even as there is turnover, even if there is employee churn, but also by providing that as a capability of something. Hey, my business does this. People are more likely to stay. Like, if I've been working in a platform which allows me to do all of my integrations and to have this level of productivity and this level of ability, I'm less likely to leave. And when I bring someone new, I'm going to onboard them and make them capable that much faster. So, that's kind of a big picture. Jeremy, you talked a little about, enabling your people before, but kind of from your view, and this is kind of going back to as you grew, you started with just connecting, I think it was your NetSuite and various marketplaces, but, you talked about how you enabled your marketing team, and I think that would be kind of interesting to talk a little about right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the marketing team for sure, our distribution team, pretty much the entire business, anywhere that we could go. So we kind of started with going person to person and what are your challenges, so it's almost like starting that foundation of process management, figuring out what people are doing and what they're running into, and then putting some thought behind that, let that stew for a little bit and come up with ways that we could automate that improve their well-being on a daily basis is one way to look at it. And inventory management that was a huge one, especially with our shopping feeds. A lot of that was done manually in spreadsheets, and automating that all of a sudden freed up those resources to be able to think about other things or strategies behind it to grow it that way. And that was, we just keep building that way. And it gets a little bit more difficult, and the easy ones are never easy anymore, but we keep hammering away at it.
Right. So, which, I mean, you're now you're getting to more high value. So yes, it's harder, but you don't have to go back. You're not, there's no rework, right? It's built on a foundation. So to me, that's a tremendous story. But, and then all of this comes together, right? And how do you demonstrate business value, Nick?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've seen, I mean, time and time again, especially now that we've talked about all of the factors that are pulling into this economic uncertainty, is that when it comes to explaining the business value of what we're trying to do, it has become critically important. I think when I advise clients, it kind of breaks down into two pieces. It's like, what are the stakeholder priorities? What are the value enablers? And more importantly, who is the stakeholder, right? I mean, oftentimes I think we, as technologists, when there is no conversation up front of what is the business what is the business objective and what we're trying to do, we are problem solvers. We see a problem, we come up with a solution, and we fix it. And oftentimes then after the fact, we are asked to explain what it solved or what it did, and that often becomes a problem. Now, I would say easy things to remember as we're kind of putting this together is that, you look at it from a cost process optimization, cost of automating processes, the automation ROI, but also, some of the more tangible things. I mean, we see a lot of companies that will, we've talked about like reducing attrition, right? There's data behind reducing attrition. There's accelerating the pace of innovation. There's building competitive differentiation. There's ensuring regulatory compliance. Those are general bucket items that as you're trying to identify some of these business stakeholders for what you're working on, if they haven't come to you already, those are ways to start the conversation. But there are ways that you can look at it from a value enable perspective of like improving, depending on the project, improving customer satisfaction, driving revenue growth, providing competitive advantages, attracting and retaining talent, as we talked about before. But ultimately, what we see here is that when you're able to align with the business and help and sometimes coach them, because they might not necessarily recognize the capabilities that data is going to provide them or automation is going to provide them, and then help collectively put a business case so that you can then kind of drive your next project. I think Jeremy mentioned a great example before is when you start small and you can kind of get some of these quick wins. And I see this a lot now, and you can start build up some of these bigger business cases. This is where you kind of start transitioning from a source of work to a strategic partner in many of the conversations that should be brought into this. I can think of a number of conversations I've had with other customers where it is that transition where it's like, yeah, I'm being brought into these meetings because the mindset has transitioned from, back to our hyper automation buzzword. So if it was on your bingo card, you get it twice, is that, hey, now people recognize that this problem could be solved. So the approach at the beginning of the project, you were brought in because they recognize, hey, can we do this? So it's no longer that conversation of no or having to, bring it in because it's like, hey, we can actually solve it this way. And there's some distrust. Now it's like, well, actually what you're trying to do might be something else, some other integration pattern, which is why it's so important you have a platform that has all of the tools you need. Is because as you bring this business value into your conversations, you will find opportunities to expand what you're working on.